The church felt far too quiet for a wedding. Silence hung in the air like heavy velvet, muffling every sound except the slow, deliberate ticking of the grand clock mounted above the altar. Claire Whitmore stood alone at the front, her white gown pristine, the delicate lace sleeves framing hands that trembled only slightly as she clutched her bouquet. She did not blink. She did not move. She could not. The whispers began as a faint undercurrent in the pews, a rustle of fabric, the creak of wooden chairs, voices pitched just low enough to pretend they were not meant to be heard. One of her bridesmaids in a dusty rose gown dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. The organist had stopped playing near. The priest stepped. Clara nodded faintly. Outside the grand wooden doors, luxury cars lined the cobblestone street. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering fractured colors across the polished floor. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The call. Nathaniel came from a family of surgeons, the sort who owned homes on the coast, hosted charity galas in the city, and believed in tradition as much as they believed in their own bloodline. He had wanted a wife who was steady, refined, someone who understood unspoke. No, as guests shifted uncomfortably in the pews, and her father's gaze kept darting toward the unopened double doors with growing alarm, she realized she had be. From the back of the church, a man's voice broke through the muted air. He had not meant to speak aloud. Adrian Blackwell had only stopped near the church because of traffic on his way to a meeting across the street. He had noticed the crowd gathered outside, their uneasy laughter and murmured conversations pulling at his curiosity. He stepped inside the cathedral out. The bride, she was not crying. She was not trembling with public grief. But there was a stillness about her, one that said more than any collapse could. Adrian had seen that kind of stillness before in mirrors, in people who had been gutted quietly and were determined not to give the world the satisfaction of watching TH. From his place near the back, he watched as the wedding photographer quietly packed away her gear. Poor girl, she murmured to someone nearby. The groom didn't show. Adrian's jaw tightened. He was not a romantic. He did not believe in fairy tale gestures or the mythology of soulmates, but he believed in dignity. And right now, this woman was being stripped of hers in front of 100 witnesses. Clara turned from the altar. She met her father's eyes, then Sophie Lane's, her maid of honor, and finally the priest's. No words passed between them. None were necessary. The ceremony was over. She descended the aisle slowly, each step shaky but deliberate. The sound of her heels striking the stone floor echoed through the hushed church as she passed each row of relatives, colleagues, and so-called friends, their faces blurred into a collage of pity and uncertainty. At the back of the church, her bouquet slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. Adrian moved without thinking. He stepped forward, picked it up, and held it out to her. "I believe this belongs to you." Clara's eyes, slightly red but dry, lifted to meet his. She accepted the bouquet with fingers that felt oddly numb. "Thank you," she said quietly. He could have left it there. He could have stepped aside, let her walk past and disappear into whatever shadows she intended to hide in. Instead, he heard himself saying something he had not planned. "I do not know what happened," he said, "and I will not pretend to. But if you do not wish to go wherever you were supposed to be going next, I know somewhere you could sit for a while." Clara blinked, studying him. He was sharply dressed, mid to late 30s, a watch of quiet luxury resting against the cuff of his shirt. His eyes were dark, intelligent, but there was a tiredness in them to a weariness she recognized. "Who are you?" she asked. He offered the barest of smiles. "Someone who knows what it feels like to be left standing." Clara Whitmore had always been described as sweet. She baked cookies for her students on Fridays, remembered birthdays without the aid of calendars, and still wrote handwritten thank you notes. She did not compete for attention, did not seek the spotlight. She lived in a small, but cozy apartment above a bookstore on King Street, spent her Saturdays tutoring children whose parents could not afford extra help. At 29, She had once dreamed of earning her graduate degree in child psychology and perhaps opening her own learning center. But Nathaniel Pierce had asked her to be practical. He proposed during a charity fundraiser, placing a diamond ring on her finger before a room full of the city's most influential people. Soon after, he had suggested she cut back on her work hours and put her plans for graduate school on hold to focus on the wedding and the family they would soon start. He told her she was too stressed, that she should create a come home. He promised they had plenty of time for her career after children. Clara told herself it was love, that compromise was part of partnership. What she did not see was that her compromise had slowly become surrender. And now, with the ceremony dissolved before it began, she had no backup plan. Adrian Blackwell, on the other hand, had never been described as sweet. In Charleston's business circles, he was known as decisive, unflinching when necessary, and almost mythically private. At 37, he owned a portfolio of historic properties across the South, including the Davenport Hotel just down the street from the church, a property currently undergoing a top-to-bottom restoration. Rumor painted him as an heir to old money. The truth was that Adrian had built his empire from the ground up, beginning with a crumbling duplex purchased with a risky loan when he was 22. He did not smile often, did not socialize beyond what business demanded, and did not date. He had been engaged once, 5 years ago, to Isabella Hart, a woman who died in a car accident only hours after a bitter argument between them. Since then, he had buried himself in work as if success could erase guilt. His penthouse overlooked the city, all clean lines and neutral tones, a space meticulously kept yet void of life. That afternoon at the church, he had not intended to stop, but when he saw Clara frozen in a moment that echoed his own past, he could not look away. Her stillness called to something deep in him. She did not accept his offer, not then. She told him she had friends, that she would manage. But when he watched her walk alone down the church steps, bouquet crumpled in her hand, her gaze fixed on the pavement like she no longer knew where her feet should take her, Adrian knew her story was far from finished. That night, Clara did not return to her apartment. Nathaniel had quietly canceled the lease without telling her. All her belongings were still their clothes in the closet, framed photographs on the shelves, unopened wedding gifts stacked neatly in the corner. But her name was no longer on the lease. Legally, she had been erased. Sophie offered her couch. Her father offered the guest room in his retirement condo. Clara refused both. She did not want the pity. She did not want the questions. She wanted a pause. 1 hour later, she found herself standing in the lobby of the Davenport Hotel renovation project. Adrian was there, in the middle of an after-hours meeting with his design team. She did not know why she had come, only that the thought of seeing him felt strangely like relief. The offer to sit, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Does it still stand? Adrian looked up from a spread of architectural plans. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. Yes, I will have my driver bring the car round. No need, she replied. I walked. He did not comment. He did not ask why. He simply closed the folder in front of him, picked up his coat, and said, "Let us go." The elevator ride to Adrian's penthouse was quiet. The hum of the city below, a faint vibration through the steel and glass. Clara stood with her arms loosely crossed, her gaze fixed ahead. The bouquet was gone, discarded somewhere between the church and here. Adrian kept a respectful distance, watching her without intruding. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a space that was every inch as luxurious as she had imagined, but not in the way she expected. The palette was soft grays and warm wood, the furniture modern yet understated. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Charleston skyline like a painting. It was beautiful, yes, but there was a stillness to it. No photographs, no clutter, nothing that spoke of a life being lived here, only one being maintained. You can stay here as long as you want, Adrian said simply, setting his keys in a ceramic dish near the door. The guest room is down the hall. Fresh linens, complete privacy. Clara turned to him. Why are you doing this? He held her gaze for a moment, as if weighing how much truth to give her. Because I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go and no one to ask. Those words stayed with her as she showered, changed into borrowed clothes that hung loosely on her frame, and tried to rest in the soft, unfamiliar bed. She did not sleep. Her mind replayed questions she could not answer. Why had Nathaniel left? Why without a word? How had she not seen it coming? What was she supposed to do now? When morning came, Adrian was already gone. On the kitchen counter sat a note in neat, deliberate handwriting. Coffee is fresh. Food is in the fridge. Stay as long as you need. Clara did not touch anything that first day. She spent the hours drifting from the guest room to the balcony and back again. Not because the penthouse was large though it was, but because the space felt almost intimidating in its stillness. The kitchen was spotless, the refrigerator neatly stocked. The living room looked like a page torn from an architectural magazine. Clean lines, a palette of grays and soft browns, furniture ranged in deliberate symmetry. Every object had a place, and every place seemed untouched. On the second day, she ventured into the kitchen and made toast. She ate it standing by the counter, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. On the third day, she folded the towels in the laundry room. On the fourth, she unpacked her small overnight bag, sliding her few clothes into the guest room closet with the care of someone borrowing space in a museum. Adrian returned late most nights. At first, their exchanges were nothing more than polite courtesies. Good evening. Did you find everything you need? Yes, thank you. But small adjustments began to take shape without either of them naming them. He started asking how her day was. She began leaving the kitchen light on for him. Once, she made tea and left a second cup on the counter for when he returned. Another night, he asked about her work before the wedding, and she told him about her students, the way their faces lit up when they understood something for the first time. How she missed that spark in her days. In return, he spoke of the Davenport Hotel renovation, how the project required balancing preservation with modern functionality. His voice was different when he spoke about buildings precise. Yes, but there was a quiet satisfaction there, as if the act of restoring something broken resonated in ways he would not put into words. One evening, after nearly 2 weeks of this unspoken truce of cohabitation, Adrian came home earlier than usual. He found Clara on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, her gaze fixed on the glow of the city below. She did not flinch when he stepped outside. I had a job offer once, she said suddenly, right after I finished my undergraduate degree. A school in Boston, inner city. High need. It was real work, the kind I dreamed about doing. Why did you not take it? He asked. Nathaniel said we should build our life here. He thought Boston was too far, too unstable. I told myself compromise was part of being in love. Adrian was silent for a moment, his eyes on the skyline. It is until it becomes disappearing. Her eyes moved to him. Why did you stop believing in people? She asked softly. I did not, he said. I stopped believing they would stay. It was a few nights later, as she was tidying the living room while he cooked. Yes, Adrian cooked when his schedule allowed, that she noticed it. On one of the shelves in the study, among perfectly aligned books and neatly arranged architectural models, sat a single framed photograph. It was the only personal photograph in the entire penthouse. A woman stood at the edge of a lake, when tugging at a red scarf around her neck. She was smiling, not the polite smile of someone posing for a camera, but the kind that came from being caught in a moment of pure ease. Adrian noticed her looking. His expression changed, the faintest shadow passing across it. Her name was Isabel, he said quietly. He offered nothing more. Clara did not press. She understood the shape of certain silences, but from that moment on, the distance between them felt less like a wall and more like a bridge half built. It began with a phone call. Adrian's mother's voice was warm in tone, but edged with precision, the kind that carried expectation beneath civility. Claire overheard only his side of the conversation from the kitchen, where she was pouring tea. Yes, I will be there, of course, yes. I will bring her. When he ended the call, she was leaning against the counter, cup in hand. Bring who? My grandparents are celebrating their anniversary this weekend, he said, as if discussing the weather. They believe I am married. Her eyebrows lifted. And why exactly do they believe that? I did not correct them. Why? He met her gaze. Because it was easier than explaining, and because it is not entirely untrue. Her pulse stumbled for half a second before she found her voice. You want me to pretend to be your wife? For 2 days. It is a small gathering. You will not be required to do anything other than smile, make polite conversation, and eat cake. And why me? Because I trust you not to make it worse, he said simply. She should have said no. It was not her family, not her problem. But there was something about the way he asked, not as a businessman issuing a directive, but as a man who disliked the spotlight and needed an ally, that made her say yes. They drove to Beaufort on a Saturday morning. The trip began in silence, the hum of the car filling the spaces between them. Adrian's focus was on the road, his hand steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable. It was not rudeness, Clara realized. It was armor. When they arrived, the family estate rose before them, an expanse of ivy-wrapped stone and deep verandas shaded by oaks that had likely stood for centuries. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and history. Adrian's mother greeted them at the door with a tight hug for her son and an appraising look for Claire. You are even lovelier than the paper said, she remarked. Welcome to the family. The evening unfolded in a blur of toasts and candlelight. The dining room glowed with gold and cream, the table heavy with silverware and crystal. Relatives leaned toward Clara with polite questions. How did you meet? What do you enjoy most about Charleston? She smiled, answered with ease, and played her part. Across the table, Adrian watched her not with suspicion, but with an almost curious attention, as though she were revealing facets he had not expected to see. That night, they retired to a guest room. 2 beds, a dresser, and a small window that led in the pale glow of the moon. Clara was pulling back the covers when he said, They think I am still the same person I was before Isabel. She looked at him. Are you? No, he said quietly. I have not been for a long time. She did not respond with advice or platitudes. Instead, she reached across the small gap between their beds and touched his hand, just for a moment, enough to say, I hear you. On the drive back to Charleston, the conversation came easier. The miles passing under the tires seemed to loosen something in him. He told her about Isabel, about the fight that sent her driving into the night, about the accident that ended with a phone call he could never forget. He spoke without tears, but his voice faltered once, and that was enough to tell her the wound had never truly closed. She did not interrupt. She simply listened, and in that quiet, something shifted, not dramatically, not yet, but undeniably. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope stamped with the Davenport Hotel's gold seal. Inside, the card read, Soft opening gala formal attire +1. Adrian set it on the kitchen counter one evening, sliding it toward her without ceremony. Will you come with me? Clara glanced from the card to him. You are asking as your pretend wife? I am asking as someone who knows it will be easier with you there. The gala was the culmination of months of restoration work. Investors, city officials, and press would be in attendance. It was not just a celebration, it was a statement. Adrian understood the value of appearances, but lately, appearances had begun to intertwine with something else when it came to her. The Davenport lobby glowed under crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floor reflecting the warm light. Tall arrangements of white roses flanked the entrance. Guests milled about in tailored suits and gowns, glasses of champagne in hand. When Adrian introduced her to a key investor, his hand rested gently on the small of her back. The gesture was casual, but the warmth of it lingered longer than she expected. People assumed they were a couple. Neither corrected the impression. Clara smiled, engaged in conversations about the hotel's history, its blend of old-world charm and modern amenities. Adrian stood beside her, answering questions about the restoration process, his voice calm and assured. At one point, she caught him watching her, not in the appraising way of a man managing a social situation, but with something softer, as if he were seeing her in a light he had not allowed himself to before. Later in the evening, a string quartet began to play near the center of the lobby. Adrian offered his hand. "One dance," he said. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The music was slow, the kind that seemed to pull the rest of the room into the background. His hand was firm at her waist, his other holding hers with a quiet certainty. They moved together with unspoken coordination, neither leading nor following too forcefully. When the song ended, they stepped apart, both a little reluctant to break the moment. They walked home together through the Charleston night, the air warm and scented faintly with magnolia. At the door to the penthouse, Adrian paused. "You have made this place feel less empty," he said, his voice low. "You have made me feel less empty." Her pulse quickened. "Then why do I still feel like you are waiting for me to leave?" He looked at her for a long moment, then unlocked the door without answering. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. She did not know if his silence was caution or fear, but she knew one thing with certainty. She was falling for him, and it terrified her more than being left at the altar ever had. The idea arrived not over dinner, not in the midst of some romantic evening, but on an ordinary weekday while Adrian was at the kitchen island reviewing contracts. "I have a proposal," he said without looking up from the papers. Clara, seated across from him with a cup of tea, raised an eyebrow. "Another anniversary dinner?" "No," he set one folder aside and met her eyes. "A marriage proposal, not in the traditional sense. A legal arrangement. We marry on paper. You help me navigate certain social and family obligations. I provide stability housing, financial support, whatever you need to get back to school or into work you want. It benefits us both." Her fingers tightened around her mug. "You are asking me to marry you as a business arrangement?" "Yes. No hidden clauses. No fine print designed to trap either of us. If one of us wishes to leave, we do so cleanly. No games." She stared at him, the words circling in her head. "And feelings. What if one of us starts having them? Then we address it honestly." His voice was steady, his gaze unflinching. That night, Clara stood by the window of the guest room, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath her. Could she do it? Bind herself, even in name, to another man so soon after being left at the altar? But then she thought of Nathaniel, of how she had molded herself into someone else's version of a wife only to be discarded without a word. Adrian was not asking her to change. He was offering something defined, honest, in its boundaries. By morning, she had her answer. "I will do it," she told him over breakfast. "But I want it written into the agreement that I will return to school and work with children again. That has to be part of the deal." Without hesitation, Adrian said, "Done." They were married quietly at the courthouse the following week. No guests, no white dress, just 2 signatures, 2 witnesses from Adrian's staff, and a quiet ride back to the penthouse. When they stepped inside, he turned to her. "Welcome home," he said. It was the first time he had ever called it that. Her smile was small but real. "Thank you, husband." A rare grin touched his mouth. "Do not get used to that." She did, slowly. Over the next few weeks, their lives found an unexpected rhythm. Clara researched graduate programs during the day. Adrian attended his usual string of business meetings, but now introduced her at events as his wife, and the words no longer sounded like fiction. One evening, as they stood side by side at a charity gala, someone asked how they had met. Adrian did not hesitate. "She walked into my life on a day neither of us expected. I have been grateful ever since." Later, she asked him why he had said that. "Because it is true," he replied simply. "You did not just agree to help me. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen." That same week, she received an acceptance letter to a competitive counseling program. Adrian surprised her by transforming one of the penthouse rooms into his study shelves for books, a desk by the window overlooking the city. "For your future clients," he said. She cried, not because of the gift itself, but because someone finally believed in her enough to build a space for her dreams. It began with a phone call she almost did not answer. The number flashed across her screen while she was in the middle of reviewing class schedules for her upcoming semester. She froze, her hand hovering above the phone. She had not seen that number in months, yet the memory of it was still sharp enough to tighten her chest. Nathaniel Pierce. She answered anyway. Clara, his voice said to calm, too familiar. I do not know what you think you have the right to say to me, she replied evenly. I know I have no right to ask for or anything, he said quickly. But can we talk, just once, face to face? Why now? Because I made a mistake. I panicked. That does not mean I stopped caring about you. She remained silent, torn between anger and disbelief. I have been in therapy, he continued. I have been working through things. And when I heard about you and Adrian Blackwell, he trailed off, then forced the words out. I just need one conversation. That is all. Claire told him she would think about it and ended the call before he could say more. When Adrian came home that evening, he noticed it immediately. Something happened, he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. She hesitated. Nathaniel called. He went very still. And he wants to talk. Do you want to talk to him? I do not think so, but it has unsettled me. Then tell him no. His tone was cool, almost flat. It is not that simple. Actually, it is. She flinched at the distance in his voice. What is this really about? Are you upset because he called? Or because you think I might go back to him? I am not upset, Adrian said. I just do not like surprisers. You mean you do not like losing control? The words left her mouth before she could pull them back. His eyes hardened. Is that what you think this is? Sometimes I do not know what this is. She shot back. We are married, but we are not married. We live together, but we never talk about the future. You say I have changed your life, but you will not let me all the way in. And now, when I am trying to be honest, you shut down. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Finally, Adrian said, maybe this arrangement has run its course. The words struck like a physical blow. So that is it. I will make sure you are taken care of. The apartment, your tuition. Do not, she interrupted, her voice tight. Do not make this clean. Nothing about us has been clean, and you know it. The truth, she said. Not the polished version, not the safe distance. The real truth. Adrian's jaw tightened. The truth is I do not know how to be what you want. And what is it you think I want? Someone who is not haunted. Someone who can love you without guilt sitting on his chest every night. Clara looked at him then, really looked, and saw that he was not being cold. He was afraid. Afraid not of her, but of what she made him feel. You know what scares me, she said quietly, that I have built a home with someone who still thinks of me as temporary. His shoulders stiffened. Maybe it is better if you take some space. You mean leave? Call it what you want. She did not cry when she packed a small bag, or when she texted Sophie to ask if her couch was free. She did not cry when she looked at Adrian one last time and saw that he could not meet her eyes. She cried in the elevator quiet, shaking sobs that broke open everything she had been holding in. Adrian remained in the penthouse, every light still on, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade away. The penthouse felt different without her, though nothing had physically changed. The furniture was in its place. The windows still framed the skyline. The coffee maker still sat on the counter, but the air was heavier. The silence was sharper. Adrian stayed away as much as possible in those first few days. He left before sunrise, returned well after midnight, and buried himself in meetings that did not need his presence. Work had always been his shield, but now even that felt brittle. On the fourth day, he came home to find her tea mug still in the sink, the blanket she favored draped over the arm of the couch. It was as if she had left parts of herself scattered through the apartment, little ghosts of the life they had built or almost built together. That was when the truth began to settle in. Clara had never needed him. She had chosen him, and he had pushed her away. His mother called that evening, "Where is Clara?" she asked without preamble. "She is not here. You let her go." He said nothing. "You know what your problem is?" she continued. "You think grief is a prison, but it is not. It is a door. You either walk through it, or you lock yourself inside. And let me tell you something, that girl was the first light I have seen in your eyes in 5 years." The call ended, but her words stayed, circling like a storm he could not outrun. That night, Adrian sat in his office and pulled out the single framed letter from Isabel that he kept. He read it again, the looping handwriting, the fragments of a life cut short. For years, this had been his tether to the past, but now, holding it, he realized it had also been his anchor, keeping him from moving forward. He set the letter aside and picked up a pen. He did not write like a man drafting a contract. He did not choose words for their elegance or strategic weight. He wrote plainly, honestly, the way he wished he had spoken to her before she left. "You were never temporary. I was temporary in how I showed up, temporary in how I let you see me, but not in how I felt. That was the most permanent thing I have ever known. I am sorry I left before you had the chance to. I am sorry I thought protecting myself mattered more than choosing you. I need to say this without contracts, without rooms full of people watching. I love you, and I will be waiting wherever you need me to wait until you decide if you want to come home." The next morning, he sent it to Sophie's apartment, where he knew Clara was staying. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, her name written in Adrian's steady hand. Clara found it on Sophie's kitchen counter after coming back from a morning walk. She carried it to the couch, but did not open it right away. She stared at it for hours, her fingers tracing the edges. Part of her feared that reading it would undo the fragile balance she had tried to rebuild in the days since leaving. The other part feared that it would confirm what she already knew. She was not done with him. When she finally unfolded the page, her breath caught halfway through the first sentence. By the time she reached the last line, her hands were trembling. There were no apologies dressed in careful distance, no evasions, just truth, his truth. She folded the letter, slipped it into her bag, and picked up her keys. The road to Asheville stretched long and quiet, winding through the Carolina countryside under a sky that shifted between rain clouds and sunlight. Clara kept both hands on the wheel, her heart thudding with each passing mile. She did not rehearse a speech. She did not make promises to herself about how the conversation would go. She only knew one thing: she could not keep running from the one person who had made her feel like more than someone who had been left behind. The cabin came into view just before dusk, nestled between tall pines and draped in the scent of fresh rain. It was nothing like his sleek penthouse, wood and stone, unpolished, whether the kind of place built for silence rather than display. She parked slowly, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, her palms damp against the steering wheel. 2 quick knocks on the door. Silence. Her chest tightened until the door opened. Adrian stood there barefoot, in worn jeans and a plain t-shirt. His hair was slightly mussed, his eyes wide with something between surprise and hope. Neither spoke at first. The air between them felt taut, almost fragile. "I got your letter," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He nodded once. "I meant every word." "I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded page. "I wrote back, but I did not want to send it. I wanted to read it to you." He stepped aside without a word, letting her in. The cabin was warm, lit by the glow of a single lamp and the low crackle of the fireplace. She sat on the couch. He took a seat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, waiting. Clara unfolded her letter and began. "You say you were temporary, but the truth is you were the most constant thing I have had since my life fell apart. When I had nothing, you gave me a place to breathe. When I could not speak, you listened anyway. You did not ask me to be perfect. You did not make me feel small. And somewhere between the silence and the late night tea, I fell in love with you." His eyes did not leave hers. "But I needed to know that I mattered more than an arrangement, more than a public image. I needed to know I was wanted in your life, not just in your space." Her voice wavered at the end, but she held his gaze. Adrian closed the distance into steps, gently taking the letter from her and setting it on a table. "You were never part of the plan," he said quietly, "but the plan stopped mattering the moment I realized I looked forward to your laugh more than any meeting. That I left the lights on every night just to know you made it home. That I started seeing this place as ours even if we never said it aloud." He knelt in front of her. "I love you not because you needed me, but because you did not pretend. You did not try to fix me. You just stayed." "I stayed because I did not want to go," she whispered. "I left because I thought you had already chosen to let me." "I did not choose to push you away," he said. "I just did not know how to believe I was allowed to be happy again. But I do now if you will let me try." She did not hesitate. She leaned forward, closing the space between them with a kiss that began softly, but deepened as if sealing every unsaid thing. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "Come home," he whispered. "You are my home," she said. They left the cabin 2 days later, driving back to Charleston in the soft light of morning. The road stretched ahead of them, winding through low country fields and towns just waking up. They did not speak much during the drive. They did not need to. The silence between them was no longer the kind that divided. It was a space they both inhabited comfortably. When they reached the city, Adrian did not take her back to the penthouse. "I am selling it," he said as he turned down a narrow, tree-lined street. "Too many ghosts." "What will you do instead?" she asked. He pulled up in front of a brick brownstone with ivy climbing its facade and warm light spilling from the tall windows. "This," he said simply, "if you want it." She looked at him, then at the building, the small balcony with its iron railings, the wooden door with its brass handle worn smooth by years of use. "It looks like it has corners for dreams," she said softly. "Then it is yours before it is mine," he replied. The weeks that followed were filled with the quiet rituals of building a life. Clara re-enrolled in graduate school, her days split between classes and volunteering at a local youth center. She poured herself into the work, helping girls who had been silenced by heartbreak or circumstance find their voices again. Adrian adjusted his own life too. He appointed a co-director to manage the Donovan Group's day-to-day operations, freeing himself from the relentless pace he had once used as armor. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs, guiding them not just in business, but in building something they could believe in. They filled the brownstone with signs of living books stacked on side tables, plants soaking in sunlight on the balcony, a pot of coffee always brewing in the mornings. There were arguments too, over paint colors and grocery lists, over who forgot to water the herbs or left laundry in the dryer. But these moments never fractured them. Instead, they became part of the rhythm. Nearly a year after she had been left standing in the church, Clara came home one evening to find the lights low and music playing softly from the old record player Adrian had restored. He was on the couch, a small velvet box in his hand. "No speeches," he said when she froze in the doorway. "No contracts, no negotiations. Just me, asking the woman I love to marry me for real." Her eyes blurred. "You were always real, even when you did not believe it." She said yes. They were married under the canopy of oak trees in the garden behind their brownstone. It was a small ceremony, only close friends and family, with no cameras, no scripted vows. When it was over, as they walked back down the garden path hand in hand, Adrian leaned close and murmured, "I did not need a wife for image. I needed someone who reminded me I still had a heart." Clara smiled through her tears. "And I did not need a husband. I needed a home, and I found one in you." The city had softened under the spring light, the cobblestone streets lined with flowering magnolia trees, their blooms spilling pale petals onto the sidewalks. Morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the brownstone, touching every familiar corner: the kitchen with its perpetually warm coffee pot, the small balcony with its wind-worn plants, the couch where books lay open in mid-read. Clara Whitmore Blackwell stood at the counter pouring tea, the steam curling upward. She had learned that mornings here had their own rhythm. Adrian read the news at the kitchen island, glasses perched low on his nose. She watered the herbs on the windowsill, often humming under her breath. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes the silence was companionable enough to make words unnecessary. It had been a year since the garden wedding, and still, every morning felt like a decision, not the kind one makes with strain, but the kind one makes with quiet gratitude. Claire's counseling practice had taken root above the same bookstore where she used to live before everything changed. She had chosen the location deliberately as circle closing, a reminder that the life she had now had been built on the ashes of the one she once thought she needed. Her office was modest, 2 armchairs angled toward each other, a desk by the window, a rug soft underfoot, and shelves filled with books on psychology, grief, and resilience. On some days, the women who sat across from her were young and uncertain. On others, they carried decades of unspoken pain. She did not promise to fix them, she promised to listen. Sometimes, after a particularly heavy session, she would stop by the youth center where she volunteered, letting the laughter of the girls there chase away whatever weight she had carried home. Adrian's work looked different now, too. He had sold 2 of his properties and stepped back from the aggressive pace that had once kept him from feeling. The Donovan Group still thrived, but his focus had shifted toward projects that meant more to him, restoring community spaces, funding small business grants, mentoring people who reminded him of his younger and proven self. It was Sophie who once said to him, half joking, "You used to build buildings. Now you are building people." He did not deny it. Life in the brownstone was far from flawless, and they preferred it that way. Adrian still burned toast at least once a week. Claire still forgot to water the balcony plants, no matter how many reminders she left herself. They bickered over movie choices and laughed about it later. He teased her about her tea collection taking over an entire cabinet. She teased him about his inability to sit still during a quiet evening. But beneath those small frictions was something steady, the knowledge that neither was going anywhere. One late afternoon, Claire sat at her desk in the counseling office, the sun catching in the gold lettering on the door. Clara Whitmore Blackwell, licensed counselor. She was finishing up notes when the bell above the bookstore door downstairs chimed. A moment later, Adrian appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, setting one on her desk. She smiled. "You know you never have to bring me coffee." "I know," he replied, "but I like seeing your face when I do." He never lingered long in her office. It was her space, and he respected that. But every time he left, he said the same thing, "Proud of you." And every time, it still mattered. At home that evening, they cooked together, an unhurried process that involved more conversation than precision. She chopped vegetables while he seared chicken, their movements weaving round each other in the small kitchen. The radio played softly in the background, and somewhere between adding rosemary and pouring wine, she realized how different this felt from the kind of home she had been told to build with Nathaniel. Here, she was not shrinking herself to fit someone's idea of the perfect wife. She was expanding into who she was meant to be. After dinner, they carried their mugs of tea to the couch. Adrian read while she sketched out ideas for a new group therapy program. Outside, the street lamps flicker on, casting a warm glow into the room. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, they would revisit their past, not to reopen wounds, but to remember the cost of where they had arrived. One night, Adrian asked, "Do you ever think about that day in the church?" "All the time," she admitted. "Do you regret any of it?" She was quiet for a moment. "No, because if Nathaniel had not left me standing there, I never would have found my way to you." He took her hand, kissed her palm, and held it against his chest. "You did not just find me," he said softly. "You built me again, and you gave me the space to become myself again." She replied, "That is what love is supposed to do." There were still days when Adrian's old shadows appeared, nights when he stood alone on the balcony, eyes fixed on some point beyond the skyline. Clara never tried to drag him inside. Instead, she stepped out, stood beside him, and let the quiet speak for them until he was ready. One such night, as the wind rustled the ivy along the balcony rail, he said. You know, I used to think I could not be happy again. That happiness was something for other people. And now, she asked, now I know happiness is not loud. He said, it is this. He gestured to the balcony. To her, to the soft light spilling from inside. It is knowing you will still be here in the morning. She smiled. Always. On their first anniversary, they did not throw a party or take a trip. Instead, they walked to the small park where they sometimes had coffee on Sunday mornings. The magnolia trees were in bloom, the petals drifting like slow snow through the air. They sat on a bench, hands entwined, watching children play on the grass. Do you remember what you said to me in the garden after we got married? Claire asked. I said I did not need a wife for image. I needed someone who reminded me I still had a heart. And I said I did not need a husband. I needed a home. Adrian leaned closer. We gave each other both. That night, before bed, Clara took a small box from the drawer beneath their bed. Inside was the letter Adrian had sent her after she left him, the one that had brought her to the cabin. She unfolded it carefully, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. He noticed from across the room. Do you still read it? Not often, she said, but when I do, I remember how close I came to losing this. We are not going to lose it, he said firmly. She placed the letter back in the box, slid it under the bed, and climbed beneath the covers. No, she agreed. We are not. Outside, Charleston settled into its nighttime hum. Inside, in their small corner of the world, to people who had once been strangers kept choosing each other not because they needed saving, but because together they had found where they truly belonged. Not a rescue, not an arrangement, a return.